My presentation is on a trip through the brain. So we're going to take a little car ride to the amygdala. The amygdala is the almond-shaped set of neurons, and it plays a key role in processing emotions and survival responses. It also forms part of the limbic system, and the two red dots in the picture shows the amygdala. Next is the brainstem. It connects the cerebrum with the spinal cord, and it's composed of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. It's also involved in autonomic functions like breathing and heartbeat. And as you can see in the picture, the yellow and red is the brainstem. Next is Broca's area. It's involved in production of speech, and aphasia to this area affects the ability to talk, but understanding and written language is not affected. And the red area also shows Broca's area. Next is the cerebellum. It is a collection of brain cells that controls balance and maintains muscle coordination. It is also called the little brain. And towards the back shows the cerebellum. It is depicted in red. Next is the cerebral cortex. It's the outer layer of the brain, and it's made up of primarily gray matter. It's also responsible for higher brain processes like sensation, thoughts, and reasoning. The cerebrum, it's divided into two hemispheres, and it processes thought, vision, language, memory, and emotions. And it's also the most recently evolved part of the nervous system, and it's also more developed in humans than in animals. The corpus callosum is a large nerve fiber bundle beneath the cerebral cortex. It connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain, so it allows them to communicate with each other. And in the picture, it is also depicted in red. The frontal lobe, it receives and coordinates messages from other three lobes of the cerebrum. It contains the motor cortex, which also controls voluntary movement, and it allows for executive functions like decision making, problem solving, and planning. So the red area shows the frontal lobe. The hippocampus, it turns information into long-term memories and allows for the recalling of facts and events. It's also involved in spatial perception, so it's basically the awareness of objects or oneself and environment. And the hippocampus is depicted in red in the picture. The hypothalamus, it works with other parts of the brain to regulate the autonomic nervous system. It releases hormones, regulates body temperature, and plays a role in sleep and fatigue. And in red shows the hypothalamus. The medulla, it's part of the hindbrain, and it also controls heartbeat, breathing, and swallowing. And towards the bottom shows the medulla in red. The occipital lobe is part of the cerebrum, and it receives and interprets visual information. It's also located at the very back of the cerebral hemisphere, and depicted in red shows the occipital lobe. The parietal lobe, it is part of the cerebrum, and it receives sensory information from throughout the body, and for instance, from sense receptors in the skin, the muscle joints, organs, and taste buds. And the parietal lobe is colored in red. The pituitary gland, it's also known as the master gland, and it regulates other endocrine glands, and it influences blood pressure, thirst, sex behavior, and body growth, and it produces the largest number of hormones. And it's very small. It's depicted in red. The primary auditory cortex, it's located in the temporal lobe, and it serves as the first relay station for auditory information. So basically it just directs where the information is going to go. It's very small, and it's also this very tiny sliver of red depicted in the picture. The primary motor cortex, it plays a key role in voluntary action, and it receives information and works with other parts of the brain. It's also part of the frontal lobe, and in the picture it is shown in blue. The reticular formation, it's a network of nerves that carries messages between parts of the brainstem, and it regulates intensity of pain and controls some body parts. It also helps it helps people focus on useful sensory input. So basically, it just blocks out unnecessary stimuli. In the picture it depicts the reticular formation. The somatosensory cortex, it receives and processes sensory information from the entire body. Sensations from receptors that are responsible for detecting touch, position, and temperature. And the sliver of red shows the somatosensory cortex. The temporal lobe, it processes auditory information and auditory memory, and the right temporal lobe processes melody and tonal changes, while the left has Wernicke's area. The thalamus, it's the two egg-shaped structures, and almost all sensory information passes through the thalamus on its way to higher levels of the brain. It translates and routes the sensory information to the correct brain location. So in the picture it is shown in red. Wernicke's area, it's involved in understanding of spoken language and written language, and aphasia to this area affects comprehension of language, but speech is hardly affected at all. It's also shown in red. And that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.